Hey guys, James back in our nerd room today. So if you're like me, which you probably are, you are very sad and at a loss at the loss of Stanley, who passed away this past week. It's safe to say that I wouldn't be making these videos more or less if it wasn't for him. I wouldn't be the person I am because without reading his stories and whatever. But thought I'd make this video and go into a little bit more as to how, even though I never met the man, I didn't know the man, he was a heavy influence on my life, predominantly since I was a child. So, guess we'll talk about it, I guess. So, even before I was born, my father was reading comics and collected them. So, I guess you could say the comic culture was in my DNA before I even realized it. So, obviously I had to start reading books when I was a kid. So, as I probably brought up in an episode or two, the first comic book I ever read was Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man number 40 that I got from my father because when I was about 5 or 6, he decided he wanted to start buying me comics, maybe get me into it. So, and since I started learning how to read, it's a good idea to get me to start reading predominantly the Marvel ones. So, but this character in particular, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, resonates probably with me more than the other characters, just not because of his spider heroics, but the way that Stan made the blueprint for him, basically having him just be this everyday person, problems like everyone has. He's more or less a loser, can't find a date, doesn't have any friends. The only people that he really resonates with are people at home, which kind of, affected me a little bit because my childhood was more or less a sheltered one, so I was reflected by that. So basically, Spider-Man, I saw a kindred soul in my childhood through the character, so to speak. Not so much the spider heroics, but the Peter Parker character himself. But Stan didn't just focus merely on making one little kid, an every person. He was much more than that when it came to comics. So I was out of the nerd culture, the comic strip, whatever, when I was in my mid-teens. I was more focused on trying to be popular, trying to get acceptance in school or whatever, up until I left high school or whatever, and I decided I was going to attempt to be a comic book artist. And if anyone's ever seen my quote-unquote comic work, they know it wasn't exactly my career path. But anyways, when I went into college, I started to do, I obviously have to do papers, and so I decided I was going to start trying to write papers based on my interests, my comic book knowledge, and research and whatever. So it was during these research sessions I would learn about the Marvel comic characters, more or less. At the time, the X-Men were popular, so it was around this time when I learned more about their influence from the civil rights era, where Stan Lee wanted to let his voice be heard, but not so much where I was going to destroy him or whatever, just do it subtly. So he created the X-Men, pretty much where Malcolm X's influence would be in Magneto, and Martin Luther King would be influencing Professor X. So it was more a peaceful versus a militant leadership on either side of the coin. So during my public speaking course, one day I did a 5-minute speech about the influence of civil rights into, say, the X-Men, and how the mutant rights in the comic book reflected the civil rights of the minorities and whatever. And I found that very interesting at the time. So the X-Men was a stepping stone for what was to come. He wasn't not just set on, just the superheroes. He wanted to make them human. He wanted to humanize them. He wanted to make them fleshed out. Like, say, Doctor Strange, for example. He wanted to take an arrogant doctor and bring him down to a person's level. He wanted to take a warmonger and take someone that people hated at the time because it was Vietnam War, turn him into a hero, i.e. Iron Man. He wanted to take celebrities and just bring him down a bit with Fantastic Four, as basically they were using their powers for fame or whatever, and they still had everyday problems as everyone else. And that was his thing. He was focused more on the person part of the superheroes. It wasn't. I mean, he had the battles, he had superhero conflicts, but the meat and potatoes of his stories were the humanity, the problems, the world around them, how everything was affecting them personally or whatever. So this right here, 22 years ago, obviously it was my senior year in college. You have to write a senior thesis. Of course, big comic guy, I chose to write a paper comparing the time of the 1890s when the comic strip was just getting born, and when they were focusing on social problems and whatnot themselves, to the 1960s. So obviously I used Stan Lee and the Marvel Comics as a compare contrast between the 1890s and the 1960s. So my senior paper was entitled Amazing Spider-Man Meets Yellow Kid, Two Everyday Individuals in a Comic Strip Universe, where I talk about how the comic strip takes real world problems or real world commentaries and tries to infuse them into each era, and how in turn they influence society afterwards. The paper itself got a C+ because my professor was more interested in the 1890s than the 1960s. But what are you going to do, right? Anyways, the project itself at the end, when I did my presentation where I talked more in depth, I got an A on it. So I want to thank, without Stan Lee and his creations, I wouldn't have had my senior project or my senior paper. So back in the 70s and 80s, and predominantly almost any Marvel comic book, you'd have what they call Stan's soapbox, where he would just more or less talk to the readers, or as be pen bulletins. So it's still Stan's soapbox. So he'd talk about what was going on predominantly, but sometimes he'd let you in on what his thoughts were about things. So thought I'd read you a little thing. So this is Stan Lee telling you, I've received lots of letters lately asking for my views on religion. While I don't feel I ought to use this funky little forum to air my own opinions about such extreme personal matter, there is one general, non-denominational viewpoint that I like to mention. It's pretty hard to believe that the ever-unfolding miracle of the universe, the awesome cycle of birth and life and death, the myriad mysteries of nature, and the wonders contained in every atom, every molecule, every living cell, and every living creature just happened to occur by accident, by chance. I believe that there is some entity far wiser and far mightier than we. I feel that there must be some divine purpose, some unfathomable plan behind the mystic fabric of mortal existence, and I believe that's about as stuffy and pontifical as I want to sound. So till we meet again, remember those immortal words of Irving Forbush, shut up already. Excelsior, Stan Lee. So, yeah, pretty much, like I said, Stan's soapbox, he tried to, instill some kind of wisdom on the reader, whatever. So, obviously that was from the Spider-Man 40. Okay, so I wanted to thank you guys for watching me ramble on for the last few minutes. So tell me, besides mourning Stan Lee, what have you taken from him and his creations? What has he taught you guys over the years? From his storytelling or his characters or whatever, what have you taken away from what Stan Lee had to show? So let me know in the comments below. So Anyways, thank you guys for watching me ramble, and maybe down the line we'll do another talking video. Who knows? But anyways, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.